the language of, are you going to integrate into our system and our community?
Yes.
Versus, do you belong with us? Do you have a sense of belonging here, right?
Do you feel like you fit? Did we create an environment that is safe for you?
Yeah.
Or did we make you, and in the language, I don't know if you've heard this language. I've been hearing it over the last year or two, which tells you I'm late to the game. Code switching.
Oh,
Students
yeah.
have to code switch.
Yeah.
Code switch is how they integrate. That doesn't mean they feel like they belong.
Oh, that's exactly right. And so
Right?
I love language. I love when just like, hey, we're going to call it this instead of this. And your whole brain is like, hello, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cap and Gown.
Good to see you. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success.
I'm Matt Boisvert and Service President of Pharos Resources.
And I was going to say this is a number episode, but I got it wrong last time. So this is our
Number 5.
5th episode, and it's going to be a good one. I'm really excited about it. So as we always do, we will chat a little bit. Then we're going to talk about the State of the Union, and then we will introduce to you our guest
We have
today.
a great guest today.
Yeah, I'm very excited about it. Okay, a couple of things I have to tell you. First of all, after we record our webinars, we release them on YouTube every Thursday. So if you miss spending time with us on Tuesday, or if you want to go back and revisit, or if you want to share that with someone, you can just go to YouTube and subscribe to our channel. That way you'll have access to all of those. Some of you, I think, are joining us on Zoom. So if you want to have access to our future conversations, and those include our Mission First conversations with Anthony Malcurie, you can go and, what do they call it? Subscribe to us?
Please subscribe, yeah.
Okay. Also, I want to show this to you. We have a lot of ways for you to connect with us. So can you talk about those while I'm figuring out how to share this?
Yeah, so if you're a podcast kind of person, we would encourage you to go to Anchor, and that's where you can have access to all of our podcasts, not just today, but every episode we've ever done with Anthony and on Cap and Gown. As Rachel said, subscribe to YouTube, and also join us on our Zoom. If you register for our Zoom webinars, you'll be admitted to all of them. So
that's right. And sometimes when we do polls or we have conversations or we have questions, if you join us on Zoom, you can get those a little bit easier. So, okay. A couple of things, Matt, that I want to talk to you about before we dive into the real business.
Okay.
First of all, we get to travel next week.
First trip since November.
So how are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm definitely out of sorts on, just booking everything.
But... Yeah. And also like the stuff that we normally know, like this is how I pack. I have no idea what I wear when I go out,
Also, you told me the story of the guy who usually travels all the time and hasn't traveled in a long time and left.
Yeah, he was a media correspondent. Like he travels all the time. He just took his first trip to see how it was. He flew to England. When he flew back, he got to the airport and realized he left all his luggage in his room.
That's going to be me.
Okay, so things are opening up. We're very excited about that. We're going to visit some of our schools in Georgia, which we're excited about, and have a couple of other trips planned. So that's great. Also, I wanted to show you, usually when I have Anthony on, I do a picture to embarrass him.
Oh.
So I thought that I would share a picture, but it embarrasses both of us. So I think it's okay. Let's see. This is the day that we wore the same shirt to the office.
Yeah, we never did that again.
I went home and changed, and then we never did that again. So very exciting.
That was a fun day.
Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is we have a user conference or a conference coming up, a professional development conference in May. I'll give you all the information for you to. Kirk, we're going to Reinhardt.
Yeah, we will be at Reinhardt just 2.5 hours away from you.
Yeah, maybe we'll stop by and see you. That would be fun. Okay, so can you talk about our professional development conference?
So Bridging the Gap, please join us for this. This is an opportunity where we're going to work with schools. Just as you know, silos on a campus are challenging, not only for you, but also definitely for students. So the Bridging the Gap conference is bringing both the academic side and the student development side together to talk through kind of what really is important in the middle, which is student success and working through all of the things that we've talked about really, but our student success funnel is kind of front and center of all of that. And so it's really powerful when you think about all of the influence that the academic side has, and also the influence that student development has with your students. And so please join us for that, Bridging the Gap. It's also our first big event where we're rolling out our theme of kintsugi and that idea of a reflection on things that broke during COVID, but also things that are really valuable that we learned.
That we're going to repair really beautifully,
Yeah.
right?
So
I just am in the last stages of confirming all of our speakers for that. And so I'm really excited because I know all of our practitioners who are going to present, and they do amazing work. So please join us for that. We've chatted the link, and then I'll give you some more information at the end. Okay, so let's do State of the Union. Matt, did you hear about—
what is the State of the Union right
Well,
now?
there's a lot of State of the Union going on. So first of all, we're, March Madness, we talked about last week. Did you see the difference between the women's workout rooms and the men's workout rooms?
I did.
Okay.
And I heard the president of the NCAA talk about it. But let's just take a look at it.
Let's just take a look. In case you are not in the know, this is the men's March Madness workout room, basketball room. This is the women's. Literally, there is a table with, I guess they're yoga mats, and then like 12 weights. So they're in big trouble.
Well, there's a lot that we could say about that, but yeah, they're in trouble.
Okay, so they have lawyers looking into Title IX problems with that, obviously, because it's not equitable. The other thing they're complaining about is that the men's March Madness got PCR tests for COVID, which is like the gold standard, and the women got a different kind, which isn't as good. And then also, which this is really shocking to me, the women's court didn't have March Madness on it. It just said women's basketball, whereas all the courts that the men played on had March Madness like emblazoned on it. You can imagine that would make some people very unhappy.
Absolutely.
So they have a law firm that's looking into what's going on there. So that's one thing that's in the news. What else is in the news?
Well, we wanted to talk about the wait list issues that are happening. So I don't know if you all know this, but there's an article in Inside Higher Ed that talks about the use of wait lists this year. And so there are a lot of schools, and particularly very top Ivy schools, that are expanding their wait list. And in some cases, expanding their wait list to the point where if every student who was originally admitted declined, they would still have too many students on this wait list. And so it's being used. It's a strategy for schools to boost enrollment.
So a couple of things about it are, first of all, more students, especially first generation students and low socioeconomic students, are applying to more schools because schools have stopped taking tests. They're like, you don't have to have the test scores, you can just apply. So they're getting more applicants, right? But then they're also stacking like ×2 on the wait list.
Right.
Like versus the size of their overarching class. And so the likelihood that students are going to get in is super low. And you and I were talking about kind of what is going to happen to smaller schools. They're going to get pinched because you have students who are on the wait list for all of these institutions. They're not going to commit to a smaller school until they hear in May, June, or July that they were on the wait list, but they're not actually getting accepted.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have to try to scramble to figure out what to do next.
So as far as predictive factors, when we're looking at things like date of deposit, you might see a slow, lower number of students depositing early, waiting to hear if they were taken off the wait list and admitted to another school.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's going to be a pinch. Basically, enrollment management is just saying it's going to be hard to know what your yield is because you have somebody who's applied to 15 different schools because they didn't have to do test scores, but they're only going to pick one, basically. Okay, also wanted to tell you about how you can use your COVID higher ed stimulus. So a lot of you are getting money to help support your students. 50% of it has to go to your students. Here are some of the approved ways that you can use that money. So first of all, you can cover your students' unpaid loan balances. So you can just straight say, hey, this is what you borrowed last year. We're going to give this money to cover that. You can also, which I love this, subsidize childcare for student parents. So if you have students who have kids and they haven't been able to come to school because they've had to stay home to take care of their kids or do schooling, you can cover that, subsidize that. You can make a direct grant to students. So just give them money. And I think we saw that a lot with CARES Act money, right? That people were just like, hey, here's some money to help you manage what's going on in your life.
And it made a huge impact on retention of students who, they just felt like they were being seen and cared for. So.
Yeah, for sure. And then this one, I'm very concerned because I think it says that institutions can use institutional grants to reimburse themselves for lost revenue while supporting students during the pandemic. Does that mean they can just give money to themselves? Maybe.
I don't know.
We're going to dig into that one a little bit more. And then provide aid to students with exceptional needs. And the last thing I'll say is they've just changed the eligibility for the supplemental nutrition assistance programs for your students. So it used to be that there were a lot of reasons why students couldn't have SNAP benefits, but now if students participate in state or federally financed work study during the regular academic year, which I love, or their estimated family contribution is 0, then they can actually get SNAP benefits. So that would be a really helpful thing for you to think about telling your students. All right. Anything else? Oh, we have book recommendations, and then we'll move on to sense of belonging.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to sense of belonging. First, a book that has been really eye-opening. I don't know. I didn't really learn the financial side of higher ed. Even working 8 years at a university, this book has been very helpful. So it is The Price You Pay for College. It's by Ron Lieber. I would highly recommend it, especially I think it's great for you to have so that you can have conversation with your students about a lot of these things that are confusing, and also for parents of incoming college students. It
is a brain expansion book. Like I've had to read a couple chapters several times, to try to get it. So
last week you talked about upstream thinking. We highly recommend this book from Dan Heath. And then
if you missed my conversation with Anthony Melchiori about upstream thinking last week, it was great. He did a great job of helping us understand how to solve problems before they start. And also he was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, it was a great one. Another book, The Art of Community. As we're talking today about sense of belonging, a huge part of sense of belonging, as you dive into it, is about community. And so this is our theme from last year. It was really essential for us to understand that and all the mechanisms as we talk about relational retention and the role of community in students staying on your campus and feeling supported. This year, our theme is kintsugi. And so this is a book of Celine Santini, and it's hard to find. If you find it, if you see that there's more than one, you should buy more and share it with your friends and family. A great book, especially as we're reflecting on all that happened, not only in our schools, but personally, and the idea of finding strength in imperfection, holding on to things that were revealed during this past year with COVID and all of that. So there's our book recommendations for the day.
Okay, so Matt, we're in the last of our 4-part series about sense of belonging.
Yeah.
We started kind of just exploring the idea of sense of belonging, what that means. Then we talked to a student about their experience in finding their place on a college campus. Last week, we talked about using upstream thinking in addressing systemic issues that make it really hard for a student to find their sense of place on a campus. Today, we have pulled out the big guns because we are joined by Dr. Sherry Woosley. She's the Senior Director of Analytics and Research at Macmillan Learning. I'm so happy for you to be with us. Let me just tell you guys about this woman. So first of all, PhD focused in educational leadership and organizations from the University of California, Santa Barbara, which thank you for getting your education in that. You're going to enlighten us about educational leadership and organizations. Also, for a long time served at Ball State as the Associate Director of Institutional Effectiveness. Sherry publishes articles like every other day, I'm pretty sure, and they're robust and so relevant. I don't know if you know this, Sherry, but your publications on like Research Hub or whatever that is, 2,600 reads and 445 citations of your work in other journal articles on that.
I didn't know that. That's awesome.
It's awesome. 445 citations. So we're very happy you're with us because you have a lot to teach us. Your work in early experiences, retention, finding a sense of belonging. And really what I love about the work that you do is it is so specific. It's like, not like, yeah, we want students to fit in, but like, hey, this is the term and this is what it means. And this is how we're going to examine it and understand it and measure it and talk about it. And so I'm really happy.
She's the right one to have. Also, I'd say I'm really glad, Sherry, because we're partners now, not competitors. Once upon a time, Sherry started MapWorks, was a big part of that and all of the research that came out of that. And so we're just grateful that we're partners now.
Absolutely. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation. Also, Sherry, is that your art behind you?
It is.
That's my other,
It is.
that's my other favorite part about you is that every time.
Well, the big one is right before COVID. Everybody's like, that's COVID, right? And I'm like, no, that was the travel schedule before COVID. That was right after the tornado in Nashville.
So, oh, goodness. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that you are not only an analytical person, but also have an artistic part of your personality as well. So let's dive in. We've talked a lot kind of in general about sense of belonging, but I know for you, I mean, I would love for you to do a primer for us just to walk through where this idea comes from and also kind of its distant cousin that we aren't so sure about anymore.
Yeah, well, that's what I think, when you invited me to talk about sense of belonging, that's what I figured we'd lay a little groundwork and then talk a little bit about what it's not, because I think people use that term and don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Or at least they intuitively know, but they don't know the nuances of it. And if you're really going to make an impact, the nuance, I think, is helpful. So, 3 plans. We want to talk about this classic theory that underlies so much of what we do, whether we know the theory or not. I want to talk a little bit about peer connections, not a lot, but a little, because I think a lot of people think sense of belonging is peer connections.
Yeah.
I think I told you earlier, I even find myself saying, oh, you just got to find your friends. And then I'm like, okay, no, I know it's not that. I have to even broaden my language. And then I want to talk about some recent work, because we learned and are learning a lot about sense of belonging with COVID. So
I love this first piece because Tinto, if you know anything about retention, Tinto is just kind of the founding father of that. To be really clear about retention, it came out of accessibility. So what he was saying was we have to make college more accessible for everybody. And we have to figure out systems and plans to help everybody be successful when we admit them to college. So this is a long time ago, came out of that. We want to have equity for everybody, which is especially relevant now. But he said some really interesting things that, like you said, we've adopted into our language, even if we have not heard of Tinto or don't really understand all of his theories. So can you lead us through that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is this underlies so many of our programs and we don't know it. So those original people, I think, who created some of the learning communities and social support and other things did it from this framework.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating. So even when you're like looking at another campus and you're like, oh, they're doing something cool, I'm going to adopt it. It may come from Tinto, but you don't know it.
Right.
So that's why I think it's really valuable to understand this framework. And there's definitely some pieces here, I think, that are still very informative. Okay. So if you think about it, like think about these big buckets as you go across, students have pre-entry attributes. They come to us with things, right? They have goals and commitments. And some of these are external, some are internal, some are in flux as they're walking through the door to our institution.
Right.
But then students have an institutional experience. And a lot of Tinto's work was about this transition time, this early time, right? But they have experiences in our academic systems and our social systems. And he broke it down that way. I thought your conversation last week mentioned systems and how our systems produce what they were designed to produce.
Yeah, that's
yes, this is Tinto, systems. And when he says academic systems, he does mean classroom and majors and the academic side of our house. And social systems, he's often talking about the peer-to-peer systems and relationships. Okay.
So Sherry, is that piece specifically then about transition? Because so he does break it out into every student is going to have transition issues, whether they end up being successful at your institution or they don't. It's basically like moving to a new city. You got to learn where the grocery store is. You've got to learn how to like where you are and how you do things and what the rules are. And then also he talks about integration, like how they're then pulled into community. But is that institutional experience primarily talking about transition or is it over both?
Some of both. And when he's talking transition, he is talking probably bigger than, it's not the first week, it's not the second week.
Right.
And the thing, if you like look across and look ahead, you see goals and commitments come up again. So it's like I get these experiences, I integrate, I don't integrate, I integrate in one side, not the other.
Mm-hmm.
And those experiences, that integration or lack of integration informs my intentions, my goals, and the decision to stay or go.
Right. So that's the place where institutions in this theory really have the ability to make an impact, right? That we're saying as you have these experiences, then you decide you want to stay, you decide that you want to be part of us or continue with us, or you decide, I don't actually want to be here anymore and I'm going to go.
Yeah, this isn't working, or my external commitments are too big, or I didn't fit, I didn't belong, I didn't make it. One of the other things I would say, like when I look back at Tinto now, because, you know, some of my early work is based on this, but when I look back now, there's a couple things I see and that I see in relationship, not only to Tinto and what we do on campus, but how the research is evolved and even how our conversations are evolved.
Yeah.
We've now gone from the student needs to socially integrate or integrate to a language that is more about sense of belonging. And I think we've done that for probably some very deliberate ways. There have been some researchers that have pushed us. Terrell Strayhorn has done some great work around African-American males, and that they don't necessarily need to integrate.
Right.
They need to.
I'm just saying, when you said that to me earlier,
yeah,
like the language of, are you going to integrate into our system and our community?
yes.
Versus, do you belong with us? Do you have a sense of belonging here? Right?
Do you feel like you fit? Did we create an environment that is safe for you?
Yeah.
Or did we make you, and in the language, I don't know if you've heard this language. I've been hearing it over the last year or two, which tells you I'm late to the game. Code switching. Students have to code switch
Yeah.
Code switch is how they integrate. That doesn't mean they feel like they belong.
No, that's exactly right. And so
Right?
I love language. I love when just like, hey, we're going to call it this instead of this. And your whole brain is like, wow, that's exactly what we should be doing. So I love the comparison of, hey, we are a thing and you can come and be here or not. And I think I talked last week with Anthony about this feeling that we have in academics sometimes, which is like, good luck, kids. I hope you can make it here. It's up to you. If you work hard and you do this and you show up and you whatever, then I hope you'll be able to be successful. That versus what you're really saying, which is like, hey, we have some work to do to make sure that this is a place where you feel good,
And
like you fit,
We've
right?
always said that in terms of if you admit a student, then how are you supporting the student and adapting to them, right?
Yeah.
So that they do fit. Why did you admit them if you didn't think they were a good fit?
Yeah, it's just such a failure of language that I appreciate uncovering, right? Like, no. One more thing I wanted to ask you about before we move off of that, and that is, when you're learning about counseling, some counselors like this approach where it's like, I'm the expert and you're kind of dumb. So come in and tell me all the things that you're doing wrong. And I'm just going to say, like, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong, you're doing that wrong. And that's like an expert novice model, right? So you come in, I'm going to tell you what you should do, and you just do what I say, which strikes me as an integration model, which is like, we're going to do this and we're going to tell you how to be successful, and you just have to figure out how to be with us so that you can be successful. Versus what we call an expert model, which is like, hey, I have some expertise in higher education, in how to be successful academically, and how to get connected to people, but you have expertise in you and what feels comfortable and safe and appropriate, and what makes you feel like you're part of us. And the expert meeting, I think, is so relevant to this conversation of sense of belonging. Does that make sense?
It does, because if you think about it, I was thinking, even when I went back and kind of looked at Tinto again, Tinto even talks about how you have to disassociate from your former communities and learn the values of your new community and integrate in.
Yeah.
That nowadays doesn't sound right.
I
Right?
agree with you. Yeah.
And that's, I think too, if you look at why people did different studies afterwards, they did studies on non-traditional students and identity development and other things because that felt uncomfortable. But there's some truth to Tinto too. I mean, don't miss out.
Yeah.
You do have to learn some language of our, you got to learn what a bursar's office is. You've got to learn, like, there are some language things you have to do. There are some, study behaviors that you probably are going to have to adopt.
Right.
But
which is why I think that expert is so important, because it is a new system and there are new things that you have to do. And to be clear, it's coming out of a time where the college population was much more homogeneous in terms of white men going to college, right? And so we didn't have the same kind of questions of, we're all from different places and different experiences, and we're in this big population together, and how do we build community together? So I think
even think of it generationally.
Yeah.
How many of them were 18-year-olds and coming straight from high school versus the non-traditional students we have now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, don't you think online opens up then, like traditionally online, not what we did in March,
Yes.
Traditionally online, don't you think that opens up even broader diversity for our students, because you have non-traditional with a job, with kids, right? All of those different elements. So,
and what systems are we putting in place that are supportive and helpful versus making somebody adapt to our existing? When I look at Tinto's model now, I understand the concepts. I like the academic social distinctions. I like those things, but I do not like the notion that a dropout decision is a failure and that we couch the lack of integration as a student failure. I think if we're going to do really good work, defining anything as a student failure lets us off the hook.
Right, that's right. Who has the responsibility for that?
Yeah, and that's right. And again, every system gets what it was created to get, right? So it's great. Okay, so can you lead us through then the distinction between peer connection and what we're talking about with sense of belonging? Because there is a difference.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, peer connections, if you think about it, is, are you finding peers that you fit with? Are you finding your friends? We used to ask questions in our old system. Are you finding people you want to spend time with, who share your interests? Those are peer connections. That's finding, as I told my daughter the other day, finding your people, right? Like, find your people.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that finding your people is different than I feel like I fit. And when you look at students and the variety of their experiences, feeling like you fit actually matters more to retention. Let me give you an example too, because I've been playing with this idea and playing with other ideas. And we've been studying these kinds of concepts. And unfortunately, despite you thinking I publish every whatever, I don't. And so some of these aren't published. And we did a study probably 8 years ago on students with a military background. There was a lot of conversations about students coming back from Iraq and other places, coming back to college. And there was also, as you may remember, a lot of money tied to it. So campuses really wanted to figure out how to get the grants and the support, and then how to support these students. Yeah. And when we were looking at those students in a larger system of things, those students had lower peer connections, lower social adjustment, reasonable academic adjustment. And so you start to kind of go, are they at risk? And when we looked at that in relationship to their outcomes were great and often better than other students. And typically we think of social and sense of belonging and fitting in and whatever as big red flags, peer connections. When we dug and looked at open-ended comments from those students who were in ROTC or reserves were maybe more similar to other students, but students who had combat experience were not finding peers.
How could they?
Duh, right? Like, duh. Yeah. They looked around and they said, am I finding people who share my interest? I don't share my interest with these people. Right. I don't, whatever. So of course those things were lower, but their outcomes were good because they were in school with very clear academic goals. They knew what they wanted to do. For them, peer connections, not that big of a deal.
They were not there to make sense.
No, not with some of the folks in their first year classes, right? Like, no, but they were there to make connections with faculty, with people in their major. They also did feel like they fit and belong. I am at this school for the right reasons. I know I am here. I fit. I just don't fit with those peers.
Okay, I just want to camp out here for a minute because you're hurting my brain a little bit in a very good way. So I'm wondering if we could say then with sense of belonging that the closeness of fit, like what I want this institution to do for me and what the institution is actually doing for me, then creates this sense of belonging. That the better aligned those things are, the more likely I am to feel like this is the place for me and I belong here. Is that fair to say?
I think it is. And when we look at this theory that I've got for you, this sense of community, sense of belonging, play that out again to the different dimensions of sense of belonging. Yeah. And think of like students with a military background. Think of non-traditionals. Think of traditionals and see if you can start to see why peer connections might be really important to a student who's going straight from high school to college.
Yeah.
But maybe not for others.
Okay, so I want to get to your theory because I really like it. And you and I talked a little bit this morning and I was like, hold on, I want to spend a long time on all of these different elements. So let's go through. So this came out of some work that you've done for a book chapter. Is that right?
Yeah. This is a book chapter my colleague and I did. Diane Tim, she's a professor at Eastern Illinois University. She's in their counseling program, Rachel, so she speaks your language.
Nice.
But she's also in the higher ed program, so speaks higher ed. And the book is coming out, or it's going to be in a book coming out from Gavin Henning and Aaron Bentrum, a book completely on sense of belonging. And its implications for student success, retention, all of that. The book is being published by Stylus Publishing, and it comes out, I think January or February is the tentative date. So we'll be watching for it because I can't wait to read the rest of it. I've only read our chapter. So our chapter was based on the research. Okay, so you remember a year ago, we realized that campuses might need to check in with students, and you all and us developed a survey that was used at 39 institutions in the spring. So many of those campuses had closed, sent students home.
Well, you and I have laughed about the fact that one of the questions we wanted to include was, where are you going to take your online courses? Because we're like, you're going to go home, but you could go to the library and do it. You're going to do it at a coffee shop, or you're going to do it, right? We didn't realize like everyone's doing it from their bedroom. Yeah.
So, kind of like the campus is only going to close for a few weeks now, and then we're all going to be back. I mean, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? But we had great data on it. And one of the questions was about what students miss most. And so what Diana and I did for this book chapter was look at the comments in that that students wrote to that question. Yeah. And we were just looking at all kinds of things, but sense of belonging was huge. And so here's one of our favorite quotes, and everybody who's read the book chapter who was helping me, this was one of their favorites. So, all right, Matt and Rachel, do you see any concepts that you think might be sense of belonging?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the opposite of sense of belonging is isolation, right? Mm-hmm. Because it is like a longing for a place where you're with people and you fit and you understand how to be, and then you're pulled out of that, and then you just feel alone and without your community.
Yeah. This is one that kind of makes your heart break until you get to that dagnabbit word.
Dagnabbit, writing this makes me realize how much I miss people.
Yeah, that connection, that emotion.
You know what I love about this is that when we were working on that survey, we said we want it to be an intervention as well, right? Like we want to collect the data, but we also want to give students space to actually reflect back on what's happening with them. Yeah. Because just that reflection of like, oh, I'm actually really lonely and I actually really miss people, was important for them at the time. So I love that he went through this process of here's everything I miss. Oh my goodness, I'm really missing everyone, right? Yeah. So it's a great.
And I'm reading in there, and also a break from family would be nice. Even with family around.
I'm alone.
I miss
not
people.
The same. Yeah, not the same for sure. Yeah. I think we have another one here too.
Yes, the other one. So this one's more positive. Like, this is what do I miss? But look at what this person misses.
So Sherry, I want to read this for our podcast listeners. The community has the best community I've ever been a part of, this institution. I've never been in another space where so many people want to pour into me. Almost everyone I come into contact with wants to get to know me for who I am and what my heart is, not for how I meet their agenda. I know around every turn, no matter where I go, there will always be someone there to support me and love on me. I've never been in a place where it is so okay to be vulnerable and to fail. I know that no matter what I'm going through, there are people who care deeply about me and would love to help me and support me. I just think that's so powerful.
Don't you want to go there? Don't you want to send your students there?
Feeling understood, empathy, the role of empathy and sense of belonging is so key.
Yeah.
But these people, I love how they expressed it, not just their agenda, but they actually want to get to know mine, and it's powerful.
It is. And also, I mean, I just wonder if you use this quote to say this is a great articulation of sense of belonging, right? This is
definitely what it feels like.
Right.
Wow.
And, you know, I'm always talking about unconditional positive regard, which is what I read in there. Like, hey, people want, they have positive regard for me no matter what's going on, no matter if I'm doing a good job or a bad job or whatever. I want to be around people who just want to be close to me. So I love that.
Me too. This one makes me super happy. Okay, so let's look at the theory, because I think the theory kind of breaks some pieces down. The theory that we used is actually an old one. It's 1986, so the timing isn't far off from Tinto, which is amazing, isn't it? But this is a theory of sense of community that really spoke to us in terms of what the students said. The theory has 4 parts, so let's go through each one. The first one is membership. And so what this says is to have sense of belonging, you have to feel like a member. So there typically are clear boundaries about membership. Sometimes they're physical, sometimes they're visual. There's symbols, there's language, there's group identification.
Yeah.
And so what students wrote about in terms of like things they missed or whatever, they would first of all say, I'm such and such. I'm a whatever the like, okay, so I'll just use, I went to University of Vermont. I'm a catamount, right? Like that's a symbol of membership. But then they also talked about being in the classroom. So that's how they put a boundary around membership. They talked about different places on campus that they missed, that people would recognize, that were part of belonging. I'm going to miss the flowering of the trees. I'm going to miss but these symbols of membership.
So Sherry, I love that because, you know, we were talking about this community book and I looked it up after we talked, and the community book says boundaries, initiation, rituals, temple, which is place, stories, and symbols. And so all of those elements are woven into this idea of membership at a particular place. I think it's so powerful. And so often you and I were talking about how with freshmen, there's some very intentional membership rites of passage and symbols and initiations that we do for our freshmen. And then I don't know that we do as great a job for the next years.
Or don't forget too, you've got sort of sense of belonging for the campus, but you've also got sense of belonging for different pieces. So do we have membership definitions, boundaries, symbols, language for majors?
Yeah, that's
do
good.
Education majors have something to latch on to?
Yeah, and I mean, you could apply this to residence life, right? Like, so I am a member of this school, I'm a member of this major, I'm a member of this house or res hall, right?
Athletic teams.
Absolutely.
Membership, right?
So this is a great place. We had a question about affinity groups, about whether or not that is a good choice and whether advisors should be talking about affinity groups. And we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I think you have a lot of insight in terms of like, does that work for everyone? Is that just like a blanket, yes, everyone should do affinity groups, or is it more nuanced than that?
I think it's always more nuanced than that. You have however many individuals. And so for some individuals, very clear membership groups is very important. And whether those are around a specific identity that I hold or a background that I have or not is likely that person and the culture that the campus has, right? Yeah. So I don't have huge kind of race ethnicity identities. So I can't speak to that. But personally, I remember being on campuses that had very heavy Greek communities, like fraternity sorority communities. I wasn't comfortable with that. But those for other people absolutely lead to retention and graduation and identity 20, 30, 40 years from now. But I
So,
personally not.
right.
And I was a legacy, so I should have, right?
So I think that's so relevant because it's like, as we're talking about the institution, historically, the institution does not bend to what is good for you. The institution is what it is, and then you come and then good luck with that, right? Versus what we're saying here, which is, no, actually, we can have a really fluid plan for, do you want to be part of that group, or do you not want to be part of that group? Or is this more attractive? Or do you not care about connecting with peers and you just want to have this academic rigor and path forward? And how do we make sense of each of those things for our students? I think is part of the challenge of retention and student success, that it's not just one size fits all, but that we actually have to be assessing by asking students, what is it that you need and how can we fill your needs, right?
And if a part of the campus culture is heavily grounded in particular membership. Okay, so the flip of University of Vermont was University of Nebraska-Lincoln, which I lived close to. It is a football campus through and through. What do you do on Saturdays? You tailgate.
Yeah.
I didn't go there because that's not me, right? So if I were to go there, that membership in my face would have been a bit much, and I would have had to find other groups and other places. So you really have to think about the students and what they need, and how do they fit, and how do you make sure you don't exclude them?
That's right, because I think what that harkened back to is the idea that sense of belonging is, how do I feel like I fit here? Whatever the things are that I need, right? Yeah. Is this school supportive and giving me opportunities for those things, instead of telling me I have to be away in order to be successful? So I think that's great. Did you have something you want to add to that?
No, that's exactly right. How it aligns with their goals, how they feel understood.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go on to the next one.
Influence. So influence is, how much does the group influence me? And so, like, students, when they talked about it, they talked about how having other people around me who study makes me study. They help create structure for me. They help create, just they help me to understand what I need to do.
Yeah.
But the other flip of influence is, I want to be able to influence the group. And if I can't do that, I'm not going to have a huge sense of belonging. And the way they talk about this was super interesting. I miss being in class, because in class, I can tell the professor what I don't understand. And that's going to influence what happens in the class.
Yeah.
I can say to my neighbor, do you get this? I don't get this. So influence is a two-way street. And they also talked about, and not surprising, in COVID, or during COVID, and particularly campus closures, there were times where campuses did things and students felt like they had no influence.
Right.
And that was really problematic. They came to me and said I had to be out in an hour.
Right.
Yeah. So it's really funny as you say that. My brain takes a whole trip to a faculty member I had in my graduate program, who we would raise, especially women in his class, we'd raise our hands and say something, and then he would continue on with his lecture like we had not said anything. And we would look around at each other and we'd be like, hey, did I just ask a question? And the person would be like, yes, I heard you ask that question. You're like, okay, well, apparently, like, I have no influence.
Nothing.
And it did make me feel like, this is not my class. Like, I don't know why I'm taking this class if my presence here has no bearing on what we're doing in this particular class. And so the certainty that I can affect some sort of, it's not even change. It's just like, hey, do you see me? Am I really here? Right? Yeah, that's really interesting. The idea that I would like to be an important member of this community. And if I cannot both be influenced by and influence others, I'm a ghost, right? it just calls into question whether or not I'm here.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The thing that I think about with higher ed, I've always thought what's really powerful about it, the end product, it's co-produced by the students and the staff and the faculty, everything. So if you think about what is that residential experience, you know, of course you have RAs, but it's so influenced by the students on the hall, and it changes every year by those individuals on that hall. And certainly when I was in the, you know, teaching and how each class was different and made up of these individuals in that. But if so much of my class experience was influenced by students, and in this environment, that being taken away, I can see where students were saying, I don't see where I belong here.
Yeah.
I don't have any influence on
What's happening?
anything that's happening.
I'm less likely to speak up in an online environment. I'm just a little box in the window. Yeah.
It is very ghosty. You know what I mean? Like you're watching and you can see everything that's happening, but you are not there.
So I would say, Sherry, one thing that came out of all of the work that was done with the Student Impact Survey were some great practices where presidents, VPs, our people started to be very creative about, okay, so how do we bring that back? How do we give students an opportunity to have a voice in what's happening and just share that experience? And so, when I think about how we move forward, so much of that is those great practices that came out of, okay, how do we give some students better influence and representation on what we're doing?
Yeah. The next one is reinforcement. And so this is where you start seeing some of the integration and the conformity. You know, are they reinforcing the values of the community? But again, it's got this flip side. Does the community meet my needs? So let me tell you, I have another quote for you because I really love this one. And what the student wrote was, being at this institution, I was consistently my happiest and healthiest self. The people around me pushed and challenged me to be better always, and I was.
That gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. So it's not just the once influence, it's this reinforcement to, you know, I'm surrounded by really smart people and I want to be in this community. I want to be a part of it.
Yeah. It's aspirational.
Well, I think about, so my sophomore year, I met a professor in my department, and he just started calling me Dr. Boisvert, sophomore undergrad. And it was like every time I saw him, he reinforced, actually gave me a better vision for who I could be and how other people saw me, and changed the way that I thought about, you know, the reason why I got back in and started working in higher ed is because he planted that seed and reinforced, hey, you belong here, but also you have a gift that you ought to be back here. So.
And you and I, so this idea of second order change, right? Which in counseling, we talk about first order change, which is like, I made my bed this morning. Look how I'm a changed person. No, you can't make your bed one time and be a changed person. But there's this other like very deep level of change where we call it second order change, which is like, I am now fundamentally a different person. I'm looking at things in a fundamentally different way. I understand them differently, and myself moving forward will never be the same because I've had this second order change. And so I think when you're talking about reinforcement being a much deeper thing, you know, we hope that college students spend 4 years on our campus and they are fundamentally different than they would have been if they had not joined us, both on the social side and academic side. There's this student development growing into who you are, that I think really relates to this idea of reinforcement for an individual student.
Yeah, I think it's lovely.
Yeah.
The last one on here is the one that I think touches your heart, right? It's the feelings. It's the connections to people, to friends, to faculty, to places. It's the poignancy. And if you've done the other three, you probably hit this one, right? Like, but it's the one that we remember. It's the one that people write about. I'll tell you, for me, reading the comments too, when I read about the seniors who were graduating, it was the emotional connections for them and the loss of those and their inability to gracefully lose those. It was the abruptness of it. One of the students wrote, all those lasts are gone. And that's what I miss the most, because I didn't get any of that.
And there's the logic applied to that, which says you had 4 years and you were successful and you got your degree, and the walking across the stage is not the crowning achievement of what you've done. You still have some, and then there's the emotional, like, I know, but I'm sad. I'm grieving because this thing was important to me, and I feel an emotional loss because I won't have a cathartic experience of putting a period to my time on campus.
I didn't even have an adjustment period.
Yeah.
It's
like you woke up one day and they're like, go home. Yeah. And then you're done. I mean,
the emotional connection was severed fast and furious. Like, no wonder. Yeah,
absolutely. I was thinking about that with my daughter in second grade. Like, all those milestones, and second grade just kind of evaporated. And and the next thing she was in third grade, but we didn't have the like, hey, this was an important year and these are the things you've learned, and there's a reflection to that, and there's being able to celebrate it and have closure and all of those things, and so many students did not get that, and to be fair, so many of our colleagues did not get it either. I mean, you didn't say goodbye to your seniors, they just never came back to campus, right? So yeah, that emotional connection.
So think about like sense of belonging in terms of those 4. That gives you a really nuanced, smart, deep way, because we often think sense of belonging, okay, orientation, we give them the language, we give them a group, we make them happy, and we're done. And no. And if all we do is membership and emotional connection, we've missed these components that will keep sense of belonging. We've missed the influence, we've missed the reinforcement.
And Sherry, I just think as you say that, what strikes me is that there's sense of belonging because it is important for student success and retention. And then there's sense of belonging as just a really amazing, beautiful experience that we're
human beings and we want to be in a community. And that's why we do this work, right?
That's right. That's right. We want, yes, there are some good outcomes that come when we do that well, but also if a student goes to a university where they have a sense of belonging, the stories that they tell and the ways that they are changed forever are significant and remarkable. And if you can gift that to a student, that's good work, right?
Sounds different than integration. I love it. Yeah, doesn't it sound different than find your friends?
Absolutely.
I think find your friends is a little lazy, right? Because again, it's your fault. If you can't find your people, I don't know what you want us to do for you, right?
You just need to keep looking. Join enough clubs and you'll find your people. No.
Well, I think it is such a powerful concept, and I know it resonates with all of our listeners because we recognize it when we see it. And what I love about the way that you've outlined that theory for us is that it gives us a way to think strategically and orderly about places where students are getting the message that they are not a member, that they don't have influence, that we're not trying to reinforce what's going on in their life, and that we don't really care about having an emotional connection with them. And so just moving through those 4 things for all of your students, I think, is a great opportunity to fix things that are broken.
I also think about schools that did this really well, and having a framework now where they can go back and review, okay, so how did we have a school that had a commuter student program, but then all of their students became commuters, and they used what they knew about being how they served their commuter population back in the day, and they applied it to this whole new cohort. Everyone's, but now they have a framework with your sense of belonging to be able to go back and understand this is why that worked really well.
Yeah.
And how do we replicate this now as we move forward in this next year as schools start to open back up, how can we be very intentional now that we have this framework? We did really well, but when we have new opportunities, how can we replicate that?
Yeah.
And that, I think, is the action item, because like you said, Sherry, we have to bring them back.
Yes.
So we're going to start in the fall and we're going to bring students back, and they are wounded and they are traumatized and they have had a year of really difficult stuff. And so using that model to say, how do we bring them back well? How do we make sure that we're addressing each one of those things so that we can quickly connect with them and make sure that we're, they feel like they belong with us.
So you told us this book is coming out in January. This is,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. But there's other ways that our guests can learn more.
Yep. We did a couple infographics on the survey results in general. So there's a couple pieces there. If you want a sense of some of the small surveys and the ways we're checking in with students throughout time, there's that. Connect with me. Obviously, when the book comes out, I'll be posting it on LinkedIn everywhere I can. I'm so excited to order it and read it. So of course I'll be.
I'm really looking forward to that. So,
and I'm hoping to take it to some conferences and some other places, because I think the content is really solid. And I can't wait to see what the other chapter authors do and see how things fit. It should be really fun.
I think that's awesome.
As we said in the beginning, we do have our Bridging the Gap conference.
Sorry. I'm not that. I don't usually do
Rachel's
the
not used to
PowerPoint.
running the PowerPoint. We do have our Bridging the Gap conference. If you go to bit.ly and it's just BTG conference, please register and join us for that. And some really in-depth, I think we'll have more to say about sense of belonging there.
Yeah.
Also, if just get connected. So we have lots of, as I said in the beginning, lots of ways for you to connect with us. You can follow us, subscribe, and we look forward to seeing everyone next week. So every Tuesday, 2:00 Central.
Sherry, thank you so much.
So fun as always.
I learned a lot. And
I love learning.
I'm an introvert, so it's hard for me because when you say something genius, I want to be like, okay, everyone just sit still for like 3 minutes and let's just let that absorb into your brain and process it. Yeah, it will be really fun to go back and revisit this whole conversation and just pause when I need to be like, I have to just sit in that for a little bit. So thank you for sharing your expertise. It is always a joy.
Super fun.
Right.
Yeah,
Great to see you guys again.
Everybody have a great day. We'll talk to you later.